astronomers need molecular spectroscopic data. How do we get it to them in the best format possible so they can find molecules on Earth using really, really high resolution cross-correlation measurements, and that they can understand the influence of their molecule on their planetary body in its entirety? How do we get them that data? And how do we make sure it's as accurate as it can possibly be and is updated as new experiments become available, as new ab initio calculations become available? That's the subject of my talk. I'm going to focus on diatomics because that's what I know best, but really most of what I'm saying is applicable to all molecules. So let's think about producers. Producers are often experimental spectroscopists that produce transitions. And then the ab initio calculations generally produce potential energy and dipole moment curves. Data modelers take this information and convert it to a form that is useful for users. And often there's some intermediate properties that I'm going to come back to. So equilibrium and band constants you're probably quite familiar with. So these are rotational constants, equilibrium, harmonic frequencies, things like that. A spectroscopic network is a set of all transitions that are mutually self-consistent. So I'll come back to that, but that's getting all the transitions together in one place. And what we do is we use this spectroscopic network and the ab initio data to produce energy and intensity models for the spectroscopy of a molecule. And if you've got this, then you can construct a line list. And a line list is often the central thing because a line list tells you all the energy levels in a molecule up to some limit, and it tells you the strength of the transitions between lines, the intensity of those transitions. And that can be used process to give you cross sections and for many other different applications. And this talk today is really a summary of a recent review paper that I published here, and feel free to click there to get some more information. Okay, so this is a central diagram in that paper, and this is the point of the talk, for you to be able to understand this diagram. And what I want you to get at this stage is basically that we've got the experimentalists, the ab initio quantum chemists, we've got spectroscopic networks and line lists being produced, and then we've got the applications, these cross sections. And there's interconnections everywhere here. We need all bits of this data to get the best form of data, which I'm going to argue to you today is a tri-hybrid line list that uses experimental derived energy levels, variational line lists like XMOL, model Hamiltonian or traditional line lists like Comput Mol Sci, and combines them all together to give a tri-hybrid line list. That's the argument today. So the simplest way of getting a line list is, and you might argue, why do we have to go through all these complications? Can't we just do it easier than this? So the simplest way is to use quantum chemistry to get your potential energy curves, dipole moment curves, and then you can get an energy spectroscopic model from the potential energy curves that just tells you what are all the energy levels in the molecule. You put these together and you get an ab initio purely theoretical variational line list. That's approach one. Unfortunately, you can't just shut up and calculate this because it turns out the ab initio calculation of these type, even diatomic molecules, is hard. Accuracy isn't good enough. So we need to go to experiment. And I want to highlight here the intensities will normally almost always come from theory. The energy levels, the transitions, usually the best ones come from experiment. So experimental spectroscopy, you can use the assigned transitions in the intensity model and just get a purely experimental line list. That won't be very complete, but it will be highly accurate where it's available. To make it a little bit more complete, what you can do is, based on your assigned transitions, you fit model Hamiltonian band and equilibrium constants, you predict energy levels, you combine lots of different papers so that you've got lots of different sources of information. So you've got one set of model Hamiltonian parameters, and then you can create a model Hamiltonian based line list. Sometimes it's called the traditional approach, the perturbative approach, all those sort of things. This is a model Hamiltonian experimentally derived line list. And I just want to highlight here that when you're producing these model Hamiltonian-based line lists, often you're relying on molecular constants. And we all know molecular constants in spectroscopy are extremely important. And I want to take a moment to just highlight Huber and Hertzberg, 1979, was compiled. And we know if you've tried to access it through an old paperback, this ChemWeb book, it wasn't that friendly for modern programming accessibility. Fortunately, this has been recently addressed by this paper, who have got a lovely interface online. It's got an API. You can contribute. Definitely, I'd encourage you to have a look at this. But there's no centralized compilation of the band constants. And probably the best thing we can do in the short term, absent some funding, is make sure we add pGopher files or something similar as supporting information, because they can actually be quite easily, with time and a bit of community engagement, we can compile all the pGopher files so that we've got data for lots of different molecules. Cool. Now, we've been talking a bit about how do we compile lots of different experiments. So for example, I've studied TiO, it's quite an important molecule in astronomy. And there's 30 more papers that have studied it, but the astronomers only want one data source, not 30 different papers. So what we do is we actually take all these assigned transitions. We get a set of self-consistent assigned transitions. So we say, okay, this one's not quite reliable. This one's a better accuracy than that one. And then we can just invert the energy levels to invert the assigned transitions to give you experimentally derived energy levels. And this is really called a Marvel analysis. Now, you can do this. We've actually done this with the support of high school students. I say support, not the entire, they can't do it all. But one of the big parts of it is finding your papers, find your molecules, figure out references, and then you've got to digitize the outdated PDF or whatever it might be. And then you've got a whole bunch of assigned transitions. You put it into a Marvel, which luckily is online. You get empirical energy levels. And the key here is that once this has been done once for the molecule, every new paper that studies this molecule should put their new data in with these assigned transitions so that we can get the energy levels. And that actually is going to flow through to all these different line lists. So I just want to really strongly encourage you. We need to get all the data on one molecule in one place, and a Marvel analysis is what we've done. And I say we, I mean lots of different people. This was first done for water. I've done it for TiO, C2, CM, with lots of support, VO is coming, zirconium oxide. And these are the sort of things you get out of it. So you've got a whole bunch of different transitions between all the energy levels. This is CM. You can check that your energy levels make sense by plotting J versus energy. Of course, these should be a harmonic. And then you get these beautiful plots over here that are showing the connectivity between all the different energy levels. And this is the electronic resolution, and this is getting down to the rotational resolution. And so the reason these are so important is that when we're calculating our row vibonic energies, you put in your potential energy curves and your couplings, that gets you your energy spectroscopic model. And this one, this orange means it's ab-initio. Then we actually solve for the motion of the nuclei, and we use these Marvel experimentally derived energy levels to refine it. So we don't use the raw potential energy curves. We refine until we get an energy spectroscopic model that matches experiment as closely as possible. This refinement process is huge in getting better energy for astronomers and other purposes. So based on this, we can actually create a variational line list by taking our intensities, our energies that we've refined using Marvel, and then eventually we get a variational line list. And this was the traditional approach that might have been used by, for example, the XMOL team. Now, turns out that this approach, this is not an XMOL line list, this is Kreutz, who did some excellent data. But if you look at the experiment in black, and you look at the variational line list in blue, you see that a lot of the time there's a dip in the experiment and a peak in the variational line list. And this is because it's really, really high resolution data, but it's actually useless because the high resolution data is such a poor match to experiment that you can't put experiment and theory on top of each other and go, oh yeah, we've found the molecule, okay? So the pure variational approach isn't working well enough for modern applications. And so to get experimental accuracy, what we actually do is put in the Marvel experimentally derived energy levels whenever we have them into a variational line list, and we get what's called a Marvelized variational line list. And you can see here the green Toto has superior performance compared to the black than all the other data. So Players 2012 actually does the same trick, and Phoenix does not do it, and Phoenix is nowhere near as good. So this Marvelized variational line list is extremely important. And then we can ask, how close are we to experiment? And this is unpublished work that actually is going to define the next stage of titanium oxide, which is good, but it's still not good enough for some applications. And you can see here why. The yellowy orangey thing is Marvel. So this is experimental data. And the black is the total cross section. And you can see in this region here, we don't have experimental line positions. And that means we're not going to get the accuracy. And this is actually, I think, quite an important region. This will be right at the end of that, 800, 900 nanometer region, which is where M dwarfs absorb titanium oxide. Red dwarfs emit, and therefore this is a really important missing region that we need to get some better data on. And so I want to highlight, I haven't worked on this myself, but you can use exactly the same trick to take a model Hamiltonian baseline list. And as I've said before, also called traditional approach, the perturbative approach, they're all the same thing. They're based on some sort of model Hamiltonian, some sort of very closely derived from experiments. And you can marvelize the model, marvelize the energy levels, or you can marvelize the transitions. And as Banath says in his recent paper, the traditional model provides line positions to spectroscopic accuracy and interpolates very accurately, but does not extrapolate very well because it's based on perturbation. So the obvious answer is, why don't we do a tri-hybrid approach? Why don't we combine the model Hamiltonian baseline list, variational line list with the experimental energy levels and get a tri-hybrid line list? This wasn't in the original paper, but it was an obvious conclusion from that paper. And my student and I have just published a paper on it. And the XMOL group back in the UK is doing related work that you can see on their website. And I just wanted to show you this data unpublished for CP. We actually already had all these different line lists and we just sort of put them together. And we can see that Marvel has a lot of the energies. MolList is extrapolating a little bit, and Duo is giving you the completeness here. So this is rotational quantum number, vibrational quantum number, X and A. And then here we can go for the strong transitions. Oh, sorry, you read this graph by going above 10 to the minus 19, 50% of transitions roughly are entirely experimental from Marvel. 30% are from Marvel and MolList, so somewhat accurate. Only a tiny fraction are from Duo, where we don't have any experimental data. But you can see that we've got the really strong transitions, experimental accuracy, which is what we expect. So the important thing here, as I close that, the important thing here is you optimize your data usefulness by communicating, citing properly, and maximizing all your data so that we can get this whole story together and make spectroscopic data work well for astronomers and other people who use it. Thank you.